Good evening, folks. It's Dr. Rowe here on this late November evening, getting closer and closer to December. I certainly know that because my kids are already starting to play Christmas music in the house. So I wanted to have a personal share with you tonight, really. There's so many things I was going to cover this week, but this one has come up a few times, and the question has been around the subject of how am I personally dealing with the news, the way the government are issuing information. You might have seen just even yesterday a new set of rules have come out on what's happening. And I don't really want this to be one of those lives that comes out and then gets pulled down because it's apparently controversial or conspiratorial. That's not really the purpose of my message that goes out through Facebook. So I'm going to keep it tight and just talk about my own personal, if you like, management of the circumstances. Now, if you're watching this, you might be watching this because you've linked with me on a personal level through some of the stuff I've done in the past, my book, Turning Point, some of the events that I've run. It might be that you've followed me through the work that I've done with my property trainings that I go out and do. And if you're watching this and you are a property investor or you run a business or you an entrepreneur, you're in a career, whatever your personal circumstances are, you're likely to be somebody in that category, and also most likely in a relationship or possibly a parent. It might be that you're not in any of those, and you're simply somebody that's going along through life at the moment, and you're single. Whatever your circumstances, it really doesn't matter. You could be retired. You could be a young teenager watching this. The types of people that tend to watch these lives ranges so much now, and we've even found that through our Seekardo show. It's been amazing. We've got over 10,000 downloads now on the show, and it's been really popular and growing, and we haven't marketed it at all. It's just organically grown, so I feel very privileged about that. So I want to just share with you personally my reaction to what's happened in recent months. Now, look, I don't want to get into this. I think we're under a difficult set of circumstances that each of us have been put into as a result of decisions made at a government level, certainly in the United Kingdom, but you could be watching this globally. How I view those decisions is my own opinion at the moment. Certainly in this space, I'm going to be mindful because I want these posts to remain in a place that serves all of you. So what I'm going to say is this. I'm going to put some notes up here. Now, we just did an absolutely amazing podcast, which was recorded last week. I believe it's gone live. And in there is an amazing interview with Dr. Rob Verkerk and Mel Aldridge. And, the two of them run a non-for-profit organization where they gather a lot of information, statistics about what's happening, testing and COVID and all these things. If you want to hear their objective opinion based on stats, it's definitely worth having a listen to that. I think that will answer a lot of questions. But what did come out of it, which is a lovely phrase, and I want to share this with you, is something that Mel said very early on, and both of them shared this, is observe but don't absorb. And I thought it was a fantastic statement, which is so reflective of the way I have found myself managing these last 8 months. And I want to say this very, very clearly to you. If you're watching this and you find yourself getting, for want of a better word, fucked up, your brain is becoming overloaded. There's information coming from left, right, and center. And sometimes it just feels like, what the fuck is going on here? And I'm meeting a lot of people who are in that state of mind. If you look at what the articles are, the newspapers, the media, there's a lot of talk about mental health, mental shutdown, people becoming disassociated, people becoming almost like in a form of a hermit state. Yes, they're using social media to talk to friends, whether it's Zoom or FaceTime or whatever, but there's definitely a sense of disconnection in some parts of the community. And there's also a sense of what's true, what's fact, what's fiction, what's being manipulated here. Are these data correct, and should I be afraid of them? Some people are completely kicking back and saying, screw this. I don't believe this at all. I literally have had a new connection made to my office today. I was talking to the guy from BT, Openreach, who was fitting it. He said he went into one house last week and he gets some people that do not come into the house. don't come close to me. I'm even more than 2 meters, and you're going to transmit this immediately to me. This is the reaction he's getting from some people. And he said he's got other people, like last week, a guy said, come into the house. This doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as a virus. It's bullshit. So he's experiencing complete extremes. And I think that's what's happening at the moment is people are reacting in so many different ways. So the phrase that I thought was brilliant in the interview we had last week was observe, but do not absorb, meaning don't allow it to become part of your psyche. If you take in everything that you're hearing from all the different extremes and then the counter arguments and the radio interviews. I was listening to something on Jeremy Vine the other day, and there's two amazingly opposite counter conversations going on about one guy quoting statistics and the other woman saying, well, hold on a minute, these statistics, we were quoted these previously about other vaccinations, and then years later it turns out those vaccinations were damaging. So she was putting one argument and he was putting another argument, and you could find yourself being thrown between all these different viewpoints. So if you're going to manage this, and it is going to get worse before it gets better, that's my personal view. If you're going to manage all this bombardment of information, the first thing to do is become an observer but not an absorber. And I think that's a great way to look at it. Another quote from years ago, and I still quote it, was written in my book Turning Point, from Deepak Chopra, was be a silent witness. So in other words, observe something, but observe it in a silent way. So you just reflect on it. You make a decision on what it is that you want to observe, and then how you take that into you, which kind of takes me to the next point, which is the way I manage this is I decide what's relevant to me. And I think that is a really powerful consideration. If you're watching this and you run a business, maybe you're an investor, you run a property business, for example, or you're in a career, you've got to decide, is this really relevant to me? Because sometimes there's so much information coming at us, if we don't filter it, it just hits us and then we find ourselves absorbing it. But what if you said, well, okay, I mean, I've just tuned right out of 90% of the information that's being presented now, because I realize it's actually not relevant to my personal life. We all have a macroscopic lifestyle that goes on inside of a global lifestyle. And this bubble that's our life, if we allow it to expand and absorb a lot of stuff that's out there that's not relevant, it actually affects both us and our children and our working environment. So, for example, as a property investor, I allow that bubble to expand more because it does affect, for example, my builders. It affects the supply of things that I need for the renovation of a property. It can affect the viewings of my property. So in that case, I'll expand out that horizon and say, well, okay, this is relevant to me. But then I hear other stuff that I go, well, that's actually not relevant to that part of my life. It's also not relevant to my personal life. So why do I need to absorb that? So what I tend to find is I disconnect from the conversations that I hear people having about stuff that I don't feel is relevant. Whereas at the start, there was such a chatter around COVID and all the stuff that was happening. I think everybody was drawn to it. Whereas now what I've decided to do, and be interested to see your thoughts on this as a listener or a viewer, is I've made a decision to tune out. And when I tuned out certain conversations, even though I might hear something and go, oh, really? So have you heard about that? I go, well, I haven't heard about that, no. Or, I observed it, a bit like I observed a green light, traffic lights on that side of the street, but I'm going in that direction. So that green light on that traffic junction is irrelevant to me because I'm turning left here. I don't need to look at that. I don't get focused on it. That's exactly how I've approached this. And if you're somebody that's studying, and what I found is people say, I'm struggling a bit with finding my time to do things because I'm following what's going on. Well, if you want to learn a new subject, those of you that do courses and online courses, and you do the trainings on the property side, whatever it is, but self-development, learning to play an instrument, learning a language, whatever, try and absorb that because it's positive and it's allowing you to grow, and disassociate and try and switch off from the evenings of consuming what seems to be inordinate amounts of social media material that's not necessarily relevant to your life. Okay, so that's number two. Number three is just take responsibility right now. Literally choose to take responsibility for what you have the power to take responsibility for. In other words, the opposite to that is don't be a victim, or don't be powerless, depending on how you want to phrase this. And this is tough because a lot of people want to start blaming the government, blaming the decisions that have been made, etc. And look, yeah, we can go there, and there's certainly been, let's just say, some interesting decisions that have been made. And there's a strong argument to say that many of us don't necessarily agree with those decisions. Unfortunately, though, once they're made, they are put upon us. And Once they are into our bubble, we have to decide how we're going to take responsibility for how we act. And I think that is a massive distinction here. If you're listening, is think about how you react to something, and then if you take responsibility for that reaction and you choose to direct yourself in a specific way, then that hopefully will navigate you through a difficult period. Now, that's a lot of words to say, hey, fuck it, there's not a lot of stuff you can take control over that's out there. So I have to make a decision. All right, that's all happening around me. My question is, what can I take responsibility for? What do I have control over? That's almost what I'm doing on a daily basis at the moment. I look at the various things that are happening in the businesses. I look at the conversations and the communication that's coming in me. I mean, I've been bombarded this last couple of weeks. I'm trying to personally juggle a lot of things. And so what I find, and this is a good point for any of you, and if you've got a lot of stuff happening, if you're running a business and you've got lots of communications going on, decide which ones are absolutely relevant right now and which ones can be moved back slightly. Because the problem you'll find is if you try and have all those communications and juggle all the things that you're doing at the moment, something's going to collapse. And then it has a direct impact on your personal life. And that's dangerous because then it affects your kids, it affects your family and personal life to the point where that can create cracks. And that's where I tend to step in and help coach people in that environment. So we have to be real careful. So, what can you take responsibility for, and what can you move to other people and say it's okay for someone else to pick this up and do this? And that's something I learned over the last couple of decades of running my businesses, my property business. I've been in business now since 1998, but certainly in the last 20 years, it's expanded quite dramatically. So I've had to learn to do that. But this last year has been intense in that respect. So start thinking about who can I bring in, or how can I bring other responsibilities into place that other people can do for me? That's another one. And the last one is just look beyond the darkness, the grayness. This winter months are closing in, so you're probably aware that there's there's emotional diseases that happen, or I don't even want to use that word, but there's emotional conditions that occur when we get these long, these short days and these long, intensive interactions with artificial light. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, interaction with artificial light, but this is not healthy. All this artificial light. So there's certain things you can do. Get yourself out as soon as there's daylight. Increase your vitamin D intake. In fact, we talk about that on the current podcast. Learn to communicate in a more open way with people so that you feel you're expressing your future. But more importantly than anything else, have a vision for the future. What is it? Those of you that are building a business, how does it look when we come through this next period? Set your goals for the end of 2021. Allow the period of difficultness over now till spring to be a chance to grow, to expand, to put things in place so that when you plant the seeds and the bulbs through these coming months, as we come through March next year, which I think is going to be another threshold for all of us, we start to see the light. If you're running a property business, and you're expanding that, focus on how many properties you can have in place, what you can do for the greater good of the world. Maybe part of your portfolio could serve a greater need. What if you took £100, £200 a month and put it towards a charity or something like that? If you're in a career and you want to move out of that career, then start setting the goals now so that happens at the end of 2021. That period there, that's got to be the change. What about your family? Start thinking about and planning holidays that you've aspirationally put off because of this period, which is going to be about a year, isn't it, of COVID. So we're always talking about this. What's going to happen next year? We're having aspirational conversations with our kids so that they have light in their lives. Otherwise, it's dangerous to constantly focused down here in this place of darkness. Okay, that was quite a long share, but hopefully it was useful for you. And again, don't underestimate these conversations that we're having, because if you can disassociate, if you can observe but not absorb, if you can take responsibility and choose what's relevant in your life, actually what happens is this clears out. You get more connected with here because you're starting to look at your vision, and also you don't have to have that stressful conversation that's happening in a lot of people's lives. You just disassociate, it's not relevant, and move forward in a positive way. Hopefully that was useful. I shall see you on my next post. So that answers the question of how I deal with stuff right now.